Hello and welcome back to the Dirt Racing series. We're on with Stage 4 and Stage 5 tonight. They're back-to-back races, starting with a TTT and second being a points race. We're going to be covering a variety of categories tonight in two different areas. We're starting off with B+ though tonight in Captor for Mentor. Just taking a look at the current standings for you so you get a little look at where we're at. So currently we've got the UN of Dirt in first place in this league with a 3-point gap. Should be enough of an advantage that they're in a solid position tonight, especially if they do well in the first race. But we'll have to see how it goes. That 3-point gap back down to DZR can easily be overturned if they fall back on the TTT, and it's especially a kind of competition with TTTs where those gaps can quickly open up in the league standings. In third place you have What Fabric 2. In fourth place, Down Dirty Buzzards, another Dirt team, I believe. And in fifth place, Danu. Just looking down the list, see who else. We've got quite a few Dirt teams in this league, along with this another What Fabric team, which is good to see. Looking at the individual rider standings for you. Currently we have Alex Clare from Galaxy, Dirty Brigadiers. A combination team, I believe. In first place, it's great to see. One of the teams who weren't necessarily towards the top in the table, but the individual riders still doing well. Seb from the UN of Dirt in second place, quite tight and may have an opportunity to overtake. See Tom Hagman from What Fabric 2, very strong rider, been around for a while, especially in the B+ area. Joint on points with Seb, so it'll be a big fight for the podium between those three in positions, with Bastian Zvak from Coned chasing them down, and Dominic Smith from the UN of Dirt as well, a little bit further back in the field. Okay, moving on to today's course. Onto the TTT, it's on the TikTok course, fairly flat, but with enough kind of interesting features. Might make life a bit more difficult for teams and allow teams to catch up some time. Looking at 19.2 kilometres. And for one of the first times, we'll be on TT bikes with draft enabled, so it'll make speeds a little bit quicker, and that's really important for how well you ride. For those who aren't aware, on the TT bikes, with the speeds being higher, it means that gaps open up very quickly, and they can really kill time. And when you're moving forwards or backwards, any kind of time where there isn't a rider pushing at the front can really drop your speed, with the resistance, with air resistance being much higher, or having a bigger impact, shall we say. Going back and looking at the course, you've got a little bump on the colder saddle springs after the deserts. So the first section is all through the deserts on Tempest Fugit kind of segment. It just in one direction. There's a little section through the springs in the middle, but we've got the colder saddle springs at the end. It's a little bit of a climb, maybe lasts a minute, minute and a half. See teams pushing up there. It is very much draftable, so we won't be all the riders pushing. They'll be able to get a bit of, I wouldn't say rest, but push a little bit less. But it'll be interesting to see how riders pace the flats versus that climb. There's not a ton of time to be gained there, but those seconds will kind of eat up, and teams who maybe take it slightly steadier to begin with will start the time gains there. On the bit after, you've got a bit of an elongated downhill. It's a lot of rest, and it's important that teams do really rest here. We see too many people in the draft pushing 2-3 watts per kilo on downhills when you can get away with 1.5, and it makes a big difference for your recovery. The better teams will start to see really resting there. Once we get to the bottom there, there's a few little dirt sections. It'll be good to see teams pushing over them. And then we're into the underwater tunnels. Once we've gone through the underwater tunnels, around 12-kilometre mark, it's all uphill, or relatively all uphill into the finish, and that's where the real time gaps open up between teams that are close, and those teams who have gone too hard at the beginning will really show. In this we have 8 riders allowed per team, and it's the 4th rider of the line that counts, unless they start off with less. So it's really important for teams that they have as many rides out as possible. It will make a difference. So moving on to looking at the actual race itself, teams are going to be setting off at 1-minute intervals as standard. I believe it's 1 minute. We'll probably find out. As per most TTTs, we don't have access to the auto start system where you get punched out, but most teams are used to this now, so they'll be setting their timers and shouting to go. Try and follow teams around, but they're starting off in league order, so people will be able to see those teams around them, the gaps to them, and how they're doing throughout the race, which is always a good measure. But one of the downsides of it is that teams tend to go a little bit too fast too early when you see that, and sometimes that can be at their deficit. They see that, oh, the team behind them is catching, or the team in front of them in the league's taking time out of them, and they start to push a little bit harder on the front, and every little bit harder you push on the front means everyone in the pack is working, and they have to work that little bit more, and that can really be the killer. Big thing about team time trials is making sure you get that recovery, and that it is some kind of recovery in the pack, because if you're really working hard just to keep in the group, you're not going to be able to contribute to pace, and you will eventually fall off, or the team will have to slow down to help you out, which will cause them to hemorrhage time again. With the B pluses, on time trial bikes, most of them will probably go for the Cadex or the Felt AR, so they're two fastest time trial bikes. Then we're looking at disc wheels on this course. See some of them with zip disc wheels, zip 858s I believe, and Super 9s, or the DT Swiss Arcs. I think they're going to be the commonplace. There'll be a couple people out on other TT bikes, but you can see one or two in the Penontrons, which isn't ideal, and that'll definitely hurt their time. Say it's about 2 to 3 kilometers an hour difference in speeds, being on a TT bike versus a normal road bike, and that can be really damaging. Essentially, you're taking almost pull watts just to stay in the pack, and so you won't be able to contribute too much on the front. There's a 45-minute gap between the start of this race and the start of the next stage, which is on Lady Liberty in New York. So a lot of the teams might think about resting a couple of riders, or having, say, 6 on the front taking pulls, 2 sat in, just to get them to the line. Or they might go with 4 and 4 split, so just 4 riders on this stage, and have 4 totally rested for the next stage. It'll be very interesting to see the kind of variety of tactics here. Especially with such a short gap, riders definitely won't be fully recovered, and it's a very brutal stage coming up in New York. Constant bumps, and we have the New York KOM, as well as the sprint segment. So it's going to be chaotic, and riders who are really fatigued from this will start to suffer, and that's why their kind of management might come in towards the end. Teams, if they know they've got a big gap over the chasing team, they might be able to just take a little bit of rest, not push so hard on the front, and just coast, keeping enough of an advantage, but making sure they're not totally blitzed for tomorrow. So you won the riders from Valhalla, just moving forward. I think it's Vikings even, not Valhalla. So sometimes if you're not quite paying attention, it's very easy just to do a little bit. See some of the riders. Not sure what's going on here with Dan Poynton. Seems to be doing a bit of work, but not moving anywhere. A couple of riders are. I'm not sure if that's just a visual glitch. See another Viking moving forward here. But we'll see it about a minute in. We'll see one of the teams set off. It's really important for teams that they're on it with these timers. You don't want to be the one who sets off 5 seconds after your actual time slot, because the times are going to be calculated at minute start intervals. And so here we go. We've got UN of Dirt. It's first in the league, setting off first, and they're getting out very hard. It's what you always want to see. You're starting from 0, unlike the new TTT system, which, I mean, that only launches you about 30, I think. So you still want to push hard, and you want to see them working the 6s until they get to maybe 45 kilometers an hour. And then slowly stretching out into order. At the moment, they're a little bit grouped up. You see Dan here just stretching towards the back. Seb doing similar. There's a couple of riders are pushing very hard at the front. We might see a little gap start to open up between these 3 as Dominic there closes the gap for them. It looks like Dave Husband starting off on the front, taking the first pull for the team. And you see they're just coming into this uphill section. There we go, DZR, team in second place, starting off, chasing down. So at 30-second intervals between the teams setting off. It looks like DZR have the full complement of 8 riders here, whereas the UN of Dirt are only on 6. And that could make a real difference as we're going. You see what Fabric here setting off as well. Maybe not as aggressive out the blocks as some other teams, which will end up costing them a little bit. They're up to 41 kilometers now. Lots of the other teams were well above 40 here. So they're still pushing, but not quite as strong. See, they're already down on time to DZR. So we're going to go back to the UN of Dirt team, take a look how they're getting on. So they've got themselves into a nice little pace line, but a few gaps are starting to open up. These front 3 riders are slightly tight. For those who are interested, when you start to overlap, you've got 2 riders side by side, then the draft significantly lowers to the point where you get almost no draft sometimes, or just the position in front. So where you've got overlap, you're costing yourselves maybe 30 watts every single second if you want to be doing the same speeds. If you look at them now, they're doing around 49, 48 kilometers an hour, which is definitely above what they'll be able to hold to the end. Maybe looking around 48, 47 as a realistic target. They're really pushing it hard on the front here. Tristan going through with 8 watts per kilo there. I'm not sure is the ideal tactic. So when you come through very quickly, remember you're always taking advantage of the rider ahead of you. So here, if Dan pushes through very hard, he's going to carry some extra momentum because he's starting in the draft, and it's going to be very hard for Clinton, or I think it'll be Seb behind him, following his wheel, to actually hold on. So when you're coming through, you don't want to do it much above pull wattage, if at all. You just want to come through smoothly on the front. You see they are going for a full pace line, it looks like, but they're just getting a little bit bunched up. And if you notice in the top right corner, up to 1%, and these little changes of gradient, especially in the desert where there aren't many of them, can really affect you. With these higher speeds, you tend to find you have a bit of a rubber banding effect, where the group will compress, then expand as they try and correct it, then expand too much, panic, compress again, and it's just this constant cycle of compression and expansion when teams aren't confident enough or used to necessarily riding with each other. You see Seb taking a very consistent pull at the front here, and much more on the pace we're expecting, 46, 47 kilometers an hour. Just going to a slight downhill, and this is what catches people out. Most people think, you know, this desert is perfectly flat, but it isn't. There are these small little gradient changes, and they do make a difference. One thing that sometimes I find frustrating is on Zwift, even when it's showing 0% in your top right corner, it could still be 0.5, well, 0.49%, and that does impact how you ride. It does impact how much your power has an effect, especially for those slight downhills. It can compress groups without them really knowing. And when you're looking at the visuals, it isn't very clear what's up and down. Sometimes it's very easy to be caught out. And I've regularly been in a case where I think, oh, I'm going uphill, and it's actually a 2-3% downhill, just because how it's visually set up. So looking at the Fuego flat segment time for that sprint, you can see that DZR and the UN of Dirt were very close, but DZR seemed to have about a 9-second lead over them so far. They're quite quick out the blocks, which is definitely going to contribute towards it. And they're 5-6 seconds up on Watt Fabric behind them. So looking at this DZR team, they seem to have gone for a very more bunch style tactic. You might see this might have just been accidental. They have a clear 1-2 at the moment at the front, which is good to see. First place, second place, and third place all have to do extra work first, obviously, because they're totally in the draft. Well, not in the draft, out of the draft is probably the better way to put it. In the wind. Whereas second place has about, I think it's about 20% reduction. Third, oh, really should get the numbers up. But it's down to about 30% by fourth place. Incremental back to there, and fourth place and behind should all be getting the same amount of reduction in wattage needed to maintain position. So looking at it, it's very bunched up behind, so it looks like they might just be going for a 1-2-3 bunch, or even just a 1-2 bunch here, which will start to cost them. When they're here in, say, third wheel, they're going to be doing about 10 watts extra at these speeds, maybe even 15 watts extra, by being all sideways across the road, because rather than being in what would be fourth position or back, they're going to essentially end up in joint second, joint third position. And how Swift's calculated here, all 3 riders here are going to be in third position, rather than just having 1 rider, and so each of those 2 on the outside are going to be losing an extra 10-15 watts, and that really does start to add up. But it is a lot easier to hold, and so less experienced teams who don't ride week in, week out, usually tend to go for it. It's a far safer approach to it. So dropping back to see how what fabric getting on, and this is exactly what I expect to see from a more experienced team. They are slower, they may not be as fit or as strong riders, but they're riding the TTT slightly better, and it's why maybe more of a gap hasn't quite opened up to Desire in front. They're riding what seems to be a very strict pace line, trying to avoid any kind of wheel overlap. See one of the riders taking over from Tom Hagman on the front. He just slips back. See Hagman here just easing back, not doing absolutely nothing, but reducing his wattage until he gets into position at the back. So it looks like maybe they're just cycling 5 rides at the front. Or possibly Hagman didn't quite come in the right position as they've got a little bit bunched up here. So you'd like to see them start to stretch out, which is a lot of them are doing this. A lot of them have dropped down below 3 watts per kilo. What you tend to see at these kind of speeds is around 3.1 to 3.3 in the pack is what you need to hold position, at least when you're in 4th or 5th wheel. You see some of these rides are just doing a little bit above that, which is why they're getting compressed. See Max Teagues in the pack here, just doing quite a big effort here. Maybe he's coming through to the front, but alone for a significant time he's holding above 4 and hence his position. See Rolf taking them up this little climb here. So on this little climb in the middle, it's important that you do go a bit harder. It's 1-2%, which does make a difference. See speeds dropping down to 42 kilometers an hour. But what's more important than the uphill is the downhill. And lots of teams find that they push a little bit too hard and get too spread out. WattFabric have taken this really well here. But when you see teams coming onto this downhill here, as you just see it's starting to go to -1, -2%, they open up a gap, and those gaps are so hard to close on the downhills. And that's why teams can end up losing a lot of time. While they try to make big gains on the uphill, they forget that they need to be together for the downhill. Taking a look at the Dirty Buzzards here. A very experienced team. Lots of TTTers here. They've lost a bit of time to WattFabric and all the teams ahead. A lot of time to Coalition behind, who are storming on through. We'll see how they're getting on. I think there's a bit of a mixed kind of strength team here, and so they might be relying on a couple of riders to do a lot of the work. Let's see, they've just got caught for a few seconds there with no one pulling on the front. See others rolling through. See Rob's trying to take it on, doing a lot of work there to hit the front again though. But as we'd like to see, you saw a couple of them doing 1 watt per kilo there, but because they got a bit out of shape on the downhill, they have to work really hard when they shouldn't need to, just to make sure they keep those gaps. See Geert here having to regularly hit 4 watts per kilo. He's totally connected, he could relax now, but he's still doing 4 watts per kilo. So Martin doing 5 there. They should all be doing 1 or 2 apart from the front rider. And this is the kind of things that cost teams time. Taking a look at this Coalition team. They've got 7 riders. Seem to be doing very well so far. 15, 16 seconds up on the Buzzards. And they've taken 26 seconds out of the Galaxy team behind them. So they've definitely had a strong start to this race. As we saw with DZR, it looks like Coalition have gone with a kind of a 1 up front strategy with a bit of a bunch behind, possibly a 1-2. It seems like most teams who have gone for that are doing very well today. So maybe we have to reassess how effective it is. But we tend to see the top TTT team, especially on the WTRL TTTs on Thursday, going for the pace lines. But it is a risky strategy. So on the ride, sprinting back on after letting the gap open up a little bit too much. Down today, he's just maybe gone a bit too hard, not eased off early enough, and he's just going to hit the front. But well done to him. He's not panicked. Just eased down the watts again. Not interfering with what's going on the front and just getting back into position. It's a real big skill that riders have a massive advantage, especially in race situations when you can practice making it back onto the group without flying through. And doing group rides is a great way to do that. Just practicing getting slightly off the back, accelerating on, but not coming through the riders at the back. Staying in that last position in the group, but getting back on, getting back in the draft. Takes a lot of good management. And it's a good way to learn how your momentum impacts things on Zwift. Jumping back to this Galaxy team. So they lost a bit of time to the teams ahead. But again, taking teams off BMTR, which is taking time off BMTR, the team behind. So it seems like most of the teams so far today have been pretty much in league order in terms of speed so far, apart from Coalition, who are absolutely flying there. Taking a look at the Galaxy, they don't seem to have a very clear structure here. I think maybe one rider was just a bit late coming to the front. If you notice, they just lost a bit of speed there. Williams here is putting in a good shift to make it back onto the front. But you can see straight away the difference in the numbers between this Galaxy team and the Coalition team ahead. Coalition team regularly above 5 on the front there. This Galaxy team of around 4.2, maybe 4.1 average on the front. And again, they've got this section right here. No one taking a pull on the front. See all the riders on the front there at around 3 watts per kilo. See Gladiate coming through, maybe 4.1. Not quite sure who's pulling, and this is just going to cost them a bit of time. See, they're down 45 kilometers an hour here. Take a look at the Coalition team. On a slight, doing a similar speed. Not quite sure what's going on there. Possibly on these slide up hills. Let's carry on back through and take a look at the other teams. So BMTR look to be a team of 4, which again is going to be hurting them. But they've taken good time so far out of L'Equipe behind French team. Oh, sorry, that is definitely not a French team for those who are looking on the right hand bar. I was thinking of Foudre for some reason. But L'Equipe, who seem to have 6 riders, but maybe not as much experience in TTTs. See BMTR holding a bit of a pace line of sorts. Maybe not the most tight and accurate, but they're definitely doing well for a team of 4 riders. Now taking time out of Galaxy ahead of them. It's good from BMTR, but where we'll start to see them struggle maybe is on that final climb, where having only 4 riders is really going to have impacted them. With 4 riders, you're lucky if you're doing 30-second pulls, you're getting maybe 1 minute 30 rest. At best, 2 minutes 30. If a couple people are taking longer pulls for every single pull threshold you take, and it's just not enough recovery to kind of maintain it for a long period of time. And so you see the fatigue really start to hit, especially when you have certain sections where you have to deal with climbs, as we see it, come out of the desert. That means, if you take a pull going into the climb, then you've got to do the climb, essentially doing a minute and a half well above threshold, and then not much rest afterwards. Going back, we see Coned here. Strange to see them so far down in the league. They're a very strong team, especially in points racing. They're very, say, not aggressive, but they agitate races, which is really good to see. And not too many teams on Zwift do that. Not many riders on Zwift do that, and it's a bit disappointing to some extent when teams don't. But Coned have always been a team who are going to give things a go. It's been great racing against them in times, and they always, if there's a segment up, they'll go push hard, try and make a breakaway, try and make something of it, rather than just sitting in, waiting for each segment, and just sprinting, sitting back in again. It's good to see more teams like that. See, they've just opened up a little gap here. I think it's Dave Bitchin maybe not holding the wheel from Hurler. Might not have been his responsibility, but that little gap opening up means that the second wheel rider here, whether it's Bastien or Dave, didn't... Well, it means they have to do this 4.2. They have to do essentially the same watch as the guy on the front to close the gap again, and that just elongates your pulls and makes you get deeper and deeper into your watt balance reserves. Looking back, we've got the second, or maybe the second watt fabric team in this race, third of their watt fabric teams in this competition, I believe, in B+ category. Just working together here. There's again lacking a little bit of structure on the front. Taking a bit of time over that Cone team of 4. But again, with a bit more structure, a bit of a clearer pull, they could probably take more time over those teams around them. Going back to Wowo. Sure how to pronounce that. And it looks like Cone have lost a rider. Might just be sitting in this team here, not quite sure what's going on there. It's a bit strange to see. Normally the kind of protocols, once you've been dropped, and another team's coming through, you just let them come through, you don't get pulled along. This WoW team seems to be in a bit of disorganised. Don't know if... I think the grey rider here is with them. But it's a little bit disorganised. There's gaps opening up, you see, for the pull. If you look at the bottom screen, you can see the gaps there. At 5 metres, Phil is just getting draft. But it was a bit above 5 meters before, so he's had to do a bit of work. We see Phil's now opening up a little gap. He just starts eating those. They're just catching up another rider on what fabric guys, possibly? Stefan? Or no, Hernold here. Oh, BMTR rider, who they're just coming through, must have dropped off his team. And back with another dirt team, the Mashers. Just 2 riders riding for them today. It's a bit disappointing to see. It's definitely going to hurt them in times, but good that they've actually managed to just go for it and give it a shot anyway. See Eben, who's a really strong TTTer. But it's very tough for them here. Just 2 of them taking pulls. Not much rest at all, and won't be able to really pull at the numbers needed to hit high speeds. Just going to come back to the front, see our rides again. We'll just watch on the teams follow the quip as they come up Col de Saddle Springs. So see there, just, I don't know if that was a mini drop out there for Bolton, but they're just not quite holding the numbers you'd want to see on the front. They're just coming into a climb. It's really important on these climbs that you hit the base hard. They're doing about 45 kilometers an hour here. It's going to drop down to below 40, maybe even mid 30s or lower. And the longer you can hold that speed, the better. So you want to push harder at the start and slightly front end the efforts up these climbs, especially when they're fairly consistent gradient. And use the advantage. Those behind you in the draft will have extra draft because they're going at higher speed, and they'll push through and hold their momentum. And you have this kind of washing machine effect on the front as the riders one by one push through the front. It just gives you a little bit extra time again as a team. See, they're definitely above kind of what they were holding before, or maybe above what they were pulling at before up here. So definitely going for it. But they might have been... Oh, we see Bolton really kicking there, trying to get back on the front. But obviously when you push through, you leave a gap behind. Thankfully Ollie here seems to have closed it down for them. And it's good work for them at the climb. And coming into the important section, as we saw with the mini climb through the springs on the flats, it's important that they come over the top of here, crest the climb all together and tight for the downhill ahead. You see Bolton just easing off the back slightly. It's at 5 meters. See at the bottom of the screen, and there we go, another sprint from him hard, just to get back on. But they've come over perfectly as you'd want to see, all bunched up together before the downhill. And one interesting thing that you might not realise, on the TT bikes, you can't super tuck, so as we come onto this downhill, you want to see him constantly pedalling away. See another big push from Bolton here. It might be a bit too much as he flies off the front. It's just eased again. But because they can't super tuck, you still want to be getting rest. See Nickel there dropping to 0 kilos. A lot of spiking power here from this Liquid X Stages team. Possibly an attempted super tuck here from Hunt. We see they're just doing little bursts in. But the problem here is a lot of them have maintained kind of an average about above 3 watts per kilo on that downhill, where they should have been getting some rest. It is important to have 1 or 2 people pushing on the front to hold that speed, but it's also important that a lot of riders get rest here, and this is going to cost them a little bit later on, because you'll see some of the other teams will have been doing 1 watt per kilo, 2 watt per kilo at most in the draft there, while one guy pushes on the front. We'll have a look at BMTR here, coming on the downhill. They've just come over the little bump into the tunnels that we see L'Equip going through now. L'Equip are doing really well here as they've come out the bottom. Walker for them and Nickel both pushing the pace high. See, they were at 55 kilometers an hour. The longer they can hold that, the better. Really impressive from Walker there to do that, and that's going to really help them time-wise. They're starting to gain back on BMTR, which is good to see. As we expected, BMTR might be running out of gas a little bit with only 4 riders. They did well there to hold that speed. Going back into this coalition team, seem to have done very well, taking taking 36 seconds out of the Galaxy team behind them. But possibly that's push has been halted a little bit. See, the Buzzards team behind them aren't too far behind, just 5 seconds coalition have taken out on them. So while they had a really good start, it seems to have kind of fallen back a bit. Has come up the little climb out. We're at 3% here, so it's not huge. Sometimes people again go too hard up here. We'd like to see them around 6 watts per kilo on the front for the top teams. 5.5 here is very reasonable, very expected. The front rider will do more, as there is enough draft at 39.40. For those behind, do maybe 1.5 watt per kilo lower sometimes. Probably around 1 on that climb. But here you see they've just come over the top and they're not pushing. They're resting, all of them are, or relatively resting. All of them are around 2 watts per kilo with just Smith there above. And that's going to, again, cost them time. It's those changes in acceleration. It's come through a little dirt section here. I'd like to see him push again. It's really good from Valand there. Pushing on the front through the dirt. You see, he's opened up a bit of a gap to his team because of that. That dirt section saps your speed. And it's these changes in speed, either way, either accelerating or decelerating, where teams can make a lot of time on the TTTs. So moving back to the front for you teams, we're just going to be on the final section of that climb out of the desert, looking at UN of Dirt. We're in first place so far. DZR have got a 16-second lead on them. And so they're going to be probably a little bit disappointed. They're going to lose a point at least in the lead DZR. And what's going to be really interesting is where they are relative to Watt Fabric. Behind, it looks like Watt Fabric are maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds up on the UN of Dirt. So the UN of Dirt can't afford to be slowing into the finish here. As we're coming to the last 2.1 kilometers now left for the UN of Dirt. Let's look at 19.2 for the finish. They really want to start pushing it, taking shorter turns on the front and cycling a lot between all the riders. Take a look back at DZR. Seem to be doing very well as a team. They've just lost one of the riders behind, but still with 7 riders, and it really does make a difference, as we talked about earlier. 10 seconds up on the Watt Fabric team, and 16 seconds up on the UN of Dirt. Follows Stidsburg, doing 5 watts per kilo on the front. It's really good. Those are the kind of numbers we'd expect to see from decent frappe teams. He's only doing 42 kilometers an hour, but that's because we've just come up. But the problem is here, we see, look at this gap. You see the rider behind chasing it down, but he's having to do 6 watts per kilo to try and get back on Stidsburg's wheel. And again, it costs time. Stidsburg here might as well just drop into the back again rather than trying to speed up. See, that's exactly what they've done. Very experienced there. See Wagner on second wheel, possibly starting to push through. And they're just taking these short stints on the front. They've got enough riders that they can afford to sacrifice a few into the line. You only need to have 4 riders across the line here. So we want to see some of these riders taking all-out pulls, especially if they're riders who maybe won't do so well in the later race. And look at this Watt Fabric team. So again, they've just lost. That's the DZR rider coming through even. And they're down to 6 riders. And you want to see a few more riders taking these, what we call hero pulls on the front. Going all in, committing as hard as they can, and then just dropping off and relaxing to the line. It's a perfect opportunity here. 1.4 kilometers to go for them. Maybe 2 minutes at most. And, yeah, I'm sure 2 of them could do 30-second efforts. And they can have a little burst to the line, the remaining 4. And this way, you know, the teams that are really experienced will start to do things like that. Be cycling a lot more. See, it just looks like they're a bit fatigued here. There's a little gap starting to open up here. This is Zibath. Can't quite grab the wheel of Patel ahead. And, you know, 3 on the front just isn't the numbers they need here. They have gained a bit of time on Diesel, although possibly they think they've done enough here and don't need to push on anymore. Might be saving themselves for the next race. Look at the buzzards coming into the finish. So they've got 1.3 kilometers to go. A lot of them will know this section really well now. Section they've done loads of times before. Know it off by heart. Coming round the bends here. And there's going to be a right-hand turn into the sprint segment. That sprint segment we're looking at 32 seconds, maybe 35 seconds for these teams to get through. See, they've just lost Dan off the back. So down to 5 riders. That's probably a hero pull from Dan, potentially. Which is exactly what I want to see. See Geert on the front. 5 watts per kilo. Tim Hansen pushing through. Really good. And this way you want just the speed to keep pushing up now. 800 meters at most from the finish. Talking less than around a minute. Maybe just less than these teams. They'll want to be pushing up and over each other repeatedly. You shouldn't see them dropping below 5 watts per kilo now. So come through the sprint segment here. 32, 35 seconds to go for them. They want to start getting up. Lots of teams just trying to go for a little sprint finish at the end, but it's really important to sap it out. doing 1 minute style effort to the line will gain you far more time than a bit of a sprint. So you want the DZR riders possibly sacrifice themselves there. Here we go. See, just not quite going. We've lost another riders. See Tim dropping off after his little pull on the front. See Rob now coming through. Very strong rider. Gert pushing up. So they're really going for it here. Not quite full sprint. You see just a little gap opening up. Want to make sure they're tight, because you can easily lose a couple more seconds of time there. They're opening up. No one wants to be the one who loses by 0.2 seconds. See Coalition coming in now. They're 7 seconds ahead of the Buzzards ahead at last check. And see they're all in the 5s here. Really good to see. Going very long to the finish rather than just sprinting at the end. Very good performance there from Coalition. It'll be interesting to see how they stack up against those podium teams. If they manage to wedge themselves in between, say, UN of Dirt and DZR, and if ZwiftPower are there as well, then that's the entire gap overturned, and that could be enough to put DZR and UN of Dirt level going into the final race. Taking a look at this Galaxy team, they've taken 8 seconds out of BMTR, and they're closing it. That's one that dropped. I think there's quite a bit of time to the Coalition team before. There seems to be a bit of a gap between the teams ahead and the teams that we're following now coming into the line, in terms of their TTTing standard and ability, possibly strength. So there's a bit of a drop off, but they're still doing very well. It's a really good performance. 5.2 on the front, similar to the teams behind and that we've already seen in front. So you know they have got it, but maybe earlier they just lost a bit of time. But really good to see this commitment into the finish as they're all pushing through now. See the pillars on the right hand side, so just about 20 seconds to go from there. Should be really getting up. See Richardson pushing very hard here, coming through the group. They've got a lot of riders. Might have been worth sacrificing a few more earlier, but it's really good to see him going for it now. They're all going to be thinking, who can be that 4th rider? You don't want to be the 5th rider, putting all that effort in for nothing. You want to make the team as quick as possible. See him really pushing through hard here now. There we go. So BMTR have done very well with just 4 riders. I commented on earlier, really good to see. Sometimes having less riders can be a benefit in terms of organisation, but it's definitely going to hurt them physically. And even more so going into the next race if some of these riders are racing again. We've got 4 seconds up on L'Equip behind. Just going to be very tight coming to the finish. They're not quite... There we go. See... Fast Sloth pushing through hard, all into the 6s, but it might have been a little bit late. I'll definitely be hoping that the L'Equip can't do any more. See, they know they can see that 4-second gap. The L'Equip behind, already up hard. Nickel going really hard for them. Ollie pushing on. See how they can do here. It's going to be very tight. They're going definitely harder than BMTR into the finish. They're going to be trying to chase down that time now. I see Nickel flying off the front. The downside of this, he's not helping his team. He's doing a great time, but it's about the 4th rider, and as soon as he breaks that draft, it's pointless. He's not helping those behind. See Bolton pushing hard, but it's going to be Dan Hunt here. That's the time over the line, and he's out the draft. They're all doing above 7 in front of him, but he's the one to set the time. They're going to have lost a little bit there by getting apart. Really good finish. They're really big numbers. That's definitely going to have made it tight with that BMTR team ahead. Taking a look at Cone, we've got a tight battle between Cone here and ZwiftPower behind. Looks like ZwiftPower have caught up 10 seconds. Possibly more, I'm not sure where they started relative to the WoW team. You see this Cone team just not quite smashing it into the finish, seeing 4. No, see Hurler going 5 watts per kilo, but again, we'd like to see a lot more. So a lot of the other teams are a bit higher than this at this point. So they're definitely losing time, so perhaps just saving themselves just a little bit for the next race. Good effort here from Hurler, having taken it on the front for a little bit already here. Pushing all the way through at this point, you want to see 5-10 second bursts on the front at most. But Hurler seems to be taking it all the way to the line here. See if anyone else can push through. With only 4, they've got to avoid any kind of break, any kind of gap over the line. Want to keep it nice and tight, but pushing hard. It looks like this WoW team Pushing. I'm not sure if this Water Fabric team have overtaken them. Looks like that could definitely be in the case. So taking time out of them into the finish, really strong push. And this is where the advantage of having extra riders does come into its own a little bit. If you can have 5-6 riders into the finish and you haven't burned them up early, you can really afford to go hard, knowing that gaps should be held across that line. See, wow, just losing 1 or 2 of the riders off the back. It's good to see them really working it, giving everything they can, dropping riders from their team to get that fastest time. Well done to them. Finally, we've got the 2 dirt mashers making their way to the finish. Really good to see them keeping on going for it, giving it a good effort even though they're down to 2. It looks like Evan's doing a lot of the work here, which is what you expect from a very strong rider, experienced TTTer with dirt time chasers. It's important, even with 2 riders, they're going to get points for finishing it. And those league points will help. So soon going to switch over to the A pluses for their race on Lady Liberty. We'll just watch them through the line first before we set off and see how the A pluses are getting on, which starts in 10 minutes. I'll start the stream immediately afterwards though. I won't have time to cover the results though, so if you look in the description you'll be able to find links to the ZwiftPower results. And soon enough, we should have the results on the Dirt Racing Series website, which is a fantastic resource. I'd really recommend having a look at it if you don't already. You should get the full results not too shortly after all of this on there. And good luck to those teams in the final. It's going to be very, very tight in this division, which is good to see. That's one of the things that we've seen every single season so far with the Dirt Racing Series. The top's been very, very tight with lots of people competing, whether it's the teams competing or individuals going for the sprint standings, the KOM jerseys, or the overall individual points.